विष्णुपदाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदांत स्वामिन् इति नामिने। नमस्ते सारस्वती देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्यादेशतारिणे। नमस्ते सारस्वती देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्यादेशतारिणे। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद। हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे। हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे। हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे। हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे। हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे। हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे। जय राधा माधवा कुंज बिहारी जय राधा माधवा कुंज बिहारी गोपी जन वल्लभा गिरिवरधारी गोपी जन वल्लभा गिरिवरधारी यशोदनंदन ब्रजजन रंजन यशोदनंदन ब्रजजन रंजन यमुना तीरा वनचारी यमुना तीरा वनचारी जय राधा माधवा कुंज बिहारी जय राधा माधवा कुंज बिहारी गोपी जन वल्लभा गिरिवरधारी गोपी Janavallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Brajanaranjana Yashodanandana Brajanaranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jayo Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jayo Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Jaya Gauranita 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 Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Guru Deva 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 Nitai Gaura Hari Bol Hari Bol Hari Bol Nitai Gaura Hari Bol Nitai Gaura Hari Bol Hari Bol Hari Bol Nitai Gaura Hari Bol. Let's recite the Mangalacharana prayers. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Ajnana-timirandasya Jnananjana-shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam yena tasmai Shri Gurave namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam yena bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadayamiyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagarajatam Sakagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaidam Savadutam Parajana Sagitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sakagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostude Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patidanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shiva Sadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. Welcome to our weekly study of Bhagavad-gita. So we are continuing to read chapter 5, entitled as Karma Sannyasa Yoga, also known as Action in Krishna Consciousness. Then we are sorry, one second. Yeah. So we are in the last section of this chapter, right? So this chapter contains 4 sections. So we are in the last section. So the last section is verses 7 to 29, liberation by focusing on the Supreme. Again, this contains 5 subsections. Verses 17 to 21, symptoms of a self-realized person. How by focusing on the Supreme makes him equipoised and attain Brahman platform. And 22 to 25 explained how sense enjoyment is distressful. So tolerate agitations till the end of life by delighting inwards, Brahmabhuta stage. Then 25, 26 is how to maintain liberation. And 27 to 28 talks about how to attain liberation through Ashtanga Yoga. It is a preview for the 6th chapter. 27 and 28 is nothing but preview to the 6th chapter, Ashtanga Yoga. And then finally, 29th verse gives the peace formula. How by knowing Krishna through Bhakti Yoga, one can attain, peace. Not just themselves, how they can create peace for the entire world as well. So that's what we're going to cover. Verses 26 to 29 we have to cover, I believe, right? We covered up to 25 last week. Any of you remember? Yeah, I think we covered up to 25.
26, yeah.
26, we have to cover, right?
Right. Yes.
Okay, great. So let me recite the, I think any of you want to recite? Katya Anishi, you can recite 26 and read the word by word meaning, translation and purport.
Sorry, trying to expand the screen here.
26, yeah.
Yeah.
You can read from the screen if you want.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do because today. Please give me 1 second. Twenty-sixth. Kama krodha viyuktanam yatinam yatachetasam abhito brahma nirvanam vartate viditatmanam. Karma from desire. I'm sorry, I can't see.
No problem.
Kama from desires, krodha and anger, vimuktanam of those who are liberated, yatinam of the saintly persons, yatachetasam who have full control over the mind, abhitaha assured in the near future, Brahma Nirvanam, liberation in the Supreme, Vartate is there, Viditatmanam, of those who are self-realized, those who are free from anger and all material desires, who are self-realized, self-disciplined, and constantly endeavoring for perfection, are assured of liberation in the Supreme in the very near future. Purport. Of the saintly persons who are constantly engaged in striving towards salvation, one who is in Krishna consciousness is the best of all. The Bhagavatam confirms this fact as follows.
Yatpada pangaja palasa vilasha bhaktya karmasyam grahatitam udgranyanti shantaha tadvana rikta matayo yatayo piruddha stroganastam aranam bhajavasudevam.
Dhanyavada.
Read the translation.
Just try to worship in devotional service Vasudeva, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Even great sages are not able to control the forces of the senses as effectively as those who are engaged in transcendental bliss by serving the lotus feet of the Lord, uprooting the deep-grown desire for future activities. In the conditioned soul, the desire to enjoy the future, to enjoy the fruitive results of work is so deep-rooted that it's very difficult even for the great sages to control such desires, despite great endeavors. A devotee of the Lord, constantly engaged in devotional service in Krishna consciousness, perfect in self-realization, very quickly attains the liberation in the Supreme. Owing to his complete knowledge in self-realization, he always remains in trance. To cite an analogous example of this, you may want to read.
The same as Bhagavad-gita.
That
Darshana dhyana samprashair matsya kurma vihangamaha svanyapatyani pushnanti tadapamapi padmaja.
you want me to continue?
Yeah, read. Yeah, continue. This
By vision, by meditation, and by touch only do the fish, the tortoise, and the birds maintain their offspring. Similarly do I also, O Padmaja. The fish brings up its offspring simply by looking at them. The tortoise brings up its offspring simply by meditation. The eggs of the tortoise are laid on land, and the tortoise meditates on the eggs while in the water. Similarly, the devotee in Krishna consciousness, although far away from the Lord's abode, can elevate himself to the abode simply by thinking of him constantly. By engagement in Krishna consciousness, he does not feel the pangs of material miseries. The state of the life is called Brahma Nirvana, or the absence of material miseries due to being constantly immersed in the Supreme. Sorry, my voice is...
Yeah, these two verses, 25 and 26, gives the qualification required to get liberated. This 25 talked about those who are beyond the dualities that arise from doubts, whose minds are engaged within, who are busy working for the welfare of all living beings, and who are free from all sins, achieve liberation in the Supreme. And then this verse, those who are free from anger and material desire, and all material desires, who are self-realized, self-disciplined, and constantly endeavoring for perfection, are assured of liberation in the Supreme in the very near future. So these two verses gives the qualification to required for a sataka, for a practicing person in the path of yoga, the qualification required to get liberated. Of course, this looks like a tall order, right? One has to be free from anger and all material desires, and he has to be self-realized, self-disciplined, and constantly endeavoring for perfection, are assured of liberation in the Supreme in near future. That means if they are continuing in this path of perfection, eventually they will be able to achieve. So it looks like a tall order, but Krishna is going to later assure how this can be done. Right? Here, Prabhupada is telling in the purport, in trying to, there are different types of people trying to liberate, people from different paths. But Prabhupada is telling of the saintly persons who are constantly engaged in striving towards salvation, one who is in Krishna conscious is the best of all, because that is what Bhagavatam says. Just by trying to worship Vasudeva by Bhakti Yoga, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, right? And then even the great sages are not able to control the forces of senses as effectively as those who are engaged in transcendental bliss by serving the lotus feet of the Lord. Because by serving the lotus feet of the Lord, automatically it uproots the deep-rooted desire for sense gratification by fruitive activities. Because once we develop taste for serving the lotus feet of the Lord, right, we automatically lose taste for sense gratification. When we are serving the Supreme Lord, our senses are engaged in the service of the Supreme. Our senses are never kept idle, right? Senses can never be kept idle. When you keep our senses, try to keep our senses idle, right? It will rebel. It will pull us in different direction. We will know, right? In the earlier we studied, right, in the second chapter, even one particular sense gets agitated. Out of the 5 senses we have, one sense gets agitated, which can pull us in different senses, different direction. Of course, we have 10 senses, 5 Jnanendriyas and 5 Karmendriyas, 5 knowledge acquiring senses and 5 working senses. So any one of them gets distracted, attracted towards something, then the whole life is pulled towards that. If there are 5 horses attached to a chariot, if one horse goes in the wrong direction, the whole, chariot will be in difficulty. All the 5 horses has to be in unison, right? They all should be, like focused on the same direction. Then the chariot will go fine. Similarly, right, sense control is must to progress in spiritual life. That's what earlier, Krishna is telling here. We should be free from all anger and material desires, right? But Prabhupada is telling it is not possible to remove all material desires until otherwise one serves the lotus feet of Krishna. So that is what he quotes from Bhagavatam 4th canto 22nd verse 39th, 22nd chapter 39th verse. So Prabhupada is telling further, in the conditioned soul, the desire to enjoy the fruitive results of work is so deep-rooted that it's very difficult even for the great sages to control such desires despite great endeavors. Right? Even though they try to control themselves, right, then they fall down. What is an example? Anybody wants to give an example? Anybody remember? In the Vedic
Vishwamitra Rishi Prabhuji.
Vishwamitra ji, yes. Vishwamitra, what happened?
When he was doing penance for 1,000 years, but when Menaka come there, he got disturbed and he forgot the penance and he started living with her for more than 100 years. I didn't know the number, Prabhuji. And then he realized that he has got disturbed and again he went for tapas. So the senses are very sensitive that even anyone who is doing very penance also, they can easily get diverted if they couldn't control their senses.
Correct.
Shakuntala was born, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good example. And thank you for sharing. The senses are so strong. We know this background of Vishwamitra ji. Vishwamitra Muni, he was actually a king. He was a Kshatriya. And of course, he had some trouble And we had trouble with who?
Vasishtha Muni, Prabhuji.
Vashishta Muni, right? And then he wanted to become, Brahma Rishi.
Yeah.
Kshatriyas are usually Raja Rishi, right? Raja Rishi means a king who is self-controlled. King also can be Rishis. Generally, the kings are Raja Rishis. Kings are self-controlled persons. They are also Rishis. So when a king is self-controlled and acts like a Rishi, then he is called Raja Rishi. He also wanted to get the title of Brahma Rishi, so he gives up his kingdom. He performs penances to attain the status of Brahma Rishi. So we'll talk about Vishwamitra story a lot more in detail later. But to cut short, right, when he is doing penances, austerities, right, whenever somebody starts performing penance, who gets nervous?
Devendra.
Yes, Indraji, right? Indra starts thinking that they are actually going to compete for my position. Indra is always feeling insecure. Even if somebody starts performing austerities or somebody starts performing Ashwamedha Yagya, he starts, getting worried. Oh, maybe this person will take over my post. Maybe he'll get qualified and then he will take over my post. So Indra sends, the various damsels in the Indraloka are there. Sometimes he sends them to disturb the sages. He this time sends Menaka. When Vishwamitra Muni is meditating, right? When Menaka comes, she doesn't make any sound. All she does is she just walks. When she's walking, the ankle bell sound, is made. While she walking, the ankle bell sound only comes. And Vishwamitra Muni, who is meditating, right? One of the senses. What is that sense? Ears.
Yes.
When we simply by hearing the ankle bell sound of Menaka walking, his meditation gets disturbed. He opens the eyes. Because that one sense pulled in the direction of ankle bell sound, because you know what the ankle bell sound is, right? Because he lived in the palace, you know what it means. So he becomes curious. He opens the eyes. There sees the beautiful form of Menaka. Then he gets attracted. He forgets the parents, right? And then we all know the story, right? Of course, they unite and they have a child. And then Menaka lives and he raises the child and all that story. So even one sense is sufficient in itself to drag us into the path of sense gratification. So another example is Bhagavan and Bhagavatam, right? Sabari Muni. He is meditating under the water. He is actually under the water. He has been meditating for long time. He sees two fish uniting. By looking at the two fish uniting, right, his meditation gets disturbed. He comes out of the water. He goes and gets married. So that is what it is. It's so important to control the senses, but to advance in the path of spiritual life. But we see that controlling the senses, even for the great sages, it's difficult. But by serving the lotus feet of the Lord, one can control the senses. How? Instead of simply trying to restricting the senses, by engaging the senses in the service of the Lord, two things happens. One is our senses get purified. Second, right, we automatically get satisfied by serving the Lord. When we get the satisfaction of the heart, right, there is no krodha, right? There is no kama. Automatically they stop. So by serving the Lord, our senses are engaged in the service of the Lord. By engaging the senses, right? The Supreme Lord is also has a name called Krishikesha. Krishikesha means one who is the controller of the senses. By serving the Krishikesha, Krishikena Sevanam. By serving our senses in the service of the Supreme Lord Krishikesha, our senses automatically comes under control. That's what this verse says. And Prabhupada is telling, a devotee of the Lord constantly engaged in devotional service in Krishna consciousness, perfect in realization, very quickly attains liberation in the Supreme. Owing to complete knowledge and self-realization, he always remains in trance. Right? Here the example again is given, how by seeing, right, a fish brings up its offspring. By meditating, right, a tortoise is, bringing that offspring. And then similarly by touching, right, the birds bring their offspring. Like that, a devotee wants to say, he always wants to see the lotus feet of the Lord, see the beautiful form of the Lord. He always wanted to meditate on the beautiful form of the Lord. And then he always wanted to touch. By serving, by doing deity worship, he wanted to touch the form of the Lord and worship him. By doing this, right, he also want to bring up his devotional service. So that's how he prays. So by doing this, right, he does not feel the pangs of material miseries because he is attracted towards the Supreme. By developing taste for the higher, he doesn't have any more taste for the lower thing, which is material enjoyment. Once one has given up the desire for material enjoyment, automatically the pangs of material misery stops. In fact, he starts developing taste. In fact, he starts experiencing bliss. And this state of life is called Brahma Nirvana, or the absence of material desires, material miseries, due to being constantly immersed in the Supreme. So, thank you. So we'll read the next verse. Any of you want to read the next verse? Next two verses together?
Shall I read, Prabhu?
Yes, please.
Parshantvipta Bahirvayan Chakshush Evendra Bhurvaha Pranapana Shamukitva Nasha Abhyantra Charinav Yatentriya Manobhukti Mugir Moksha Pranaya Vikeksha Bhayakrodo Yeshata Mukta Yevacha. Parshant sense objects such as sound, Kritva keeping, Bahiha external, Bayayan unnecessary, Sakshuha eyes, Cha also, ever certainly, Antre between, Puruvaho the eyebrows, Prana Apunav up and down, moving air, Shamu in suspension, Kitva keeping, Nasha Abhyantra within the nostril, Charina blowing. Yata controlled Indriya senses. Mana hai mind. Buddhi hai intelligence. Muni hai the transcendentalist. Moksha for liberation.
Parayanaga.
Parayanaha. Being so destined. Vikta having discarded. Vikata having discarded. Ita wishes. Bhaya fear. Krodha anger. Yeah, one who. Shata always. Mukta liberated. Eva certainly. He is. Shutting out all the external sense objects, keeping the eyes and vision concentrated between the two eyebrows, suspending the inward and outward breath within the nostrils, and thus controlling the mind, sense, and intelligence, the transcendentalist aiming at liberation becomes free from desire, fear, and anger. One who is always in this state is certainly liberated. Purport. Being engaged in Krishna consciousness, one can immediately understand one's spiritual identity, and then one can understand the Supreme Lord by means of devotional service. When one is well situated in devotional service, one comes to the transcendental position qualified to feel the presence of Lord in the sphere of one's activity. This practical position is called liberation in the Supreme. After explaining the above principle of liberation in Supreme, the Lord gives instruction to Arjuna as to how one can come to that position by practice of mysticism or yoga known as Ashtanga Yoga, which is divisible into eightfold procedure called Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranayama, Pratihara, Dharana, Dhyana, and Samadhi. In the sixth chapter, the subject of yoga is explicitly detailed, and at the end of it, it is only
Preliminary.
preliminarily explained. One has to drive out the sense objects such as sound, touch, form, taste, and smell by the pratyahara process in the yoga, and then keep the vision of the eyes between the two eyebrows and concentrate on the tip of the nose with closed lids. There is no benefit in closing the eyes altogether because then there is every chance of falling asleep. Nor is there benefit in opening the eyes completely because then there is the hazard of being attached by sense objects. The breathing movement is restrained within the nostrils by neutralizing the up moving and the down moving air within the body. By practice of such yoga, one is able to gain control over the sense, define some outward sense objects, and thus prepare oneself for liberation in the Supreme. This yoga process helps one become free from all kinds of fear, anger, and thus feel the presence of super soul in that transcendental situation. In other words, Krishna consciousness is the easiest process of executing yoga principles. This will thoroughly explain in the next chapter. A Krishna conscious person, however, being always engaged in devotional service, does not risk losing his senses to some other engagement. This is a better way of controlling the sense than by the Ashtanga Yoga.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, yes.
So the previous two verses, Krishna mentioned the qualification to attain liberation, and it looked very difficult process, very difficult requirement. But here, Krishna explains how this can be done. Because one of the things is controlling the material desire, right? Means purifying the mind. Mind has to be purified. Until the mind is purified, our desires cannot be purified. Right? Because mind is the storehouse of all our desires. Right? 99% of all our activities are all dictated by our mind only. Right? Our mind most of the time dictates what we should do. Based on its past experiences, mind creates various type of desires. And then mind has this ability to produce different combinations of desires. Though those desires, if they're all based on our material impressions of our past experiences, right? So those desires will be material desires only. And those material desires, we know that material activities, which is born of the material desires, are the cause of bondage in this world. So mind needs to be controlled. Mind needs to be purified. So here Krishna specifically gives a mechanical process to control the mind. Right? Shutting out all external sense objects, keeping the eyes and vision concentrated between the eyebrows, suspending the inward and outward breaths within the nostrils, and thus controlling the mind, senses, and intelligence. That transcendentalist aiming at liberation becomes free from desire, fear, and anger. One who is always in this state is certainly liberated. How to become free from desire, fear, and anger? Because this desire, fear, and anger are all created by the activities of the mind. By controlling the mind, the senses and intelligence all comes under control. Even though sense is higher, right, in terms of hierarchy, right, there is mind, then above that is buddhi, above that is ahankar. In terms of hierarchy, buddhi is higher than intelligence, and buddhi is higher than mind, manas. Intelligence is higher than the mind. But instead of keeping intelligence in the higher position, instead of intelligence dictating the mind, most of the time our mind dictates the senses and the intelligence. Because mind is the storehouse of all our desires. Whenever a particular desire comes, we use our intelligence to fulfill that desire. So in that sense, intelligence becomes servant of the mind. So that is why Krishna focuses on controlling the mind. Until the mind is not controlled, right? Mind is not purified, our desires will not be purified. Our desires can, drag our senses and intelligence in different directions for sense engagement. So how this mind can be controlled? Here he is giving, right, a mechanical process, right? Shutting out all external sense objects, keeping the eyes and vision concentrated between the eyebrows, suspending the inward and outward breaths within the nostrils. By doing this, particular activity of sitting in this lotus posture, right? Closing the eyes, of closed, focusing the eyes on the tip of the nostrils, right? And then basically shutting out all the senses, pratya ahara, withdrawing the senses from the external objects, right? And then keeping the eyes and vision concentrated by the eyebrows, and then by suspending the breathing process, pranayama, right? He can control the mind. So Prabhupada is explained in the purport, right? A person engaged in Krishna consciousness, right? He knows his spiritual identity. What is a spiritual identity? I am not this body, I am eternal spirit soul. And then he knows that the purpose of the part, I am part and parcel of the Supreme. Purpose of the part is to serve the whole. He has a very clear understanding of the identity. Hence, it is easy for him to act according to that identity. For example, if I'm going to work in Amazon, right, in order to do my duty properly, first what I need to know? I need to know my position in my Amazon, right? I need to know what my identity within the realm of Amazon. If I'm a software manager, software engineer, or a finance controller, or a vice president of engineering, some position I should know. Once I know what my position is, then I can discharge my duty. Of course, I also should know what my position is in relation to the CEO of the company. CEO of the company sets the direction for the company. And then if I know what my position is, right, accordingly, right, I know in connection to the CEO, I am in a particular group, particular division, right, or particular team. And this particular team is working to fulfill this part of the company's mission, which is set by the CEO, right? So similarly, we should know what our identity is, specifically in relation to Krishna. In relation to the Supreme Lord, our identity is we are an eternal part and parcel of the Supreme. And then the purpose of the Supreme, purpose of the part is to serve the Supreme. So by positioning himself in devotional service, one can easily come to the transcendental position. So this is for devotees, right? But if there is somebody is not in that platform of devotional service, how can they liberate? So for them only, Krishna is giving this mechanical process of meditation. Prabhupada explains this is called Ashtanga Yoga. This will be elaborated in detail. The whole chapter Krishna dedicates on focus, controlling the mind. through the Ashtanga Yoga in the 6th chapter. So what is going to come in the 6th chapter? This is a preview, right? This Ashtanga means 8 limbs. A yoga process which contains these 8 limbs to control the mind is called Ashtanga Yoga, right? These 8 divisions are Yama, the do's, Niyama, the don'ts, Asana, right? Making the body flexible through various sitting postures. Yogasanas, we call it as Yogasana. Yogasana means asana which is connected for the purpose of yoga is called Yogasana. There are so many different types of asanas are there. All those asanas are there to make the body healthy and flexible so that we can sit in one place for a long time. By doing all the asanas, ultimately there are only 1 or 2 asanas are useful in the meditation. Padmasana and Sukhasana, right? By sitting in the lotus posture, one can continue the meditation for a long time. In order to continue the meditation for a long time in one place by sitting without moving, one's body has to be fit and flexible. For that only a yogi practices all the different asanas. Ultimately, all the asanas are there to make the body flexible and fit so that he can sit in the lotus posture, Padmasana, for a long time. So asana is there to make the body flexible. And pranayama. Pranayama is having the practice to control the breath. The breathing process, when it is controlled, right, slowly, the inward and outward airs, right? It is mentioned, right? Here, Krishna is using the word prana apana, upward and downward moving air. Samau means that should be in equilibrium or suspension. When somebody knows how to control the inward breathing and outward breathing, and they suspend it, right, their life gets prolonged. By controlling the breathing, one can prolong the life. By prolonging the life, one can actually continue in the meditation process for a long time. Because to attain perfection in the meditation process, one has to perform this meditation for a long, long time. For that, he has to control pranayama. Pratyahara. Ahara means food. Pratyahara means not giving food. What is not giving? For what we should not give food? For the senses. By withdrawing the senses from the sense objects. That means drying up the senses. By not letting the senses interact with sense objects. Pratyahara. By withdrawing the senses from the sense objects, then the mind needs to be focused on one thing. It's called dharana. Dharana means ability to focus the mind on one thing. Like, for example, if you take a convex lens and come outside and then show it towards the sun rays, all the sun rays which is hitting parallelly on the convex lens gets focused on one particular point, the focal length, right? When it gets focused on that one particular point, it becomes concentrated. We can experience the power of sun rays. When all of them comes towards that one point, it has the ability to generate intense heat and start fire. Similarly, when the mind is able to focus on one point, dharana is this process of focusing the mind on one thing. By focusing the mind on one thing, right, the mind can be trained to focus on one thing. That is called dharana. When we focus at the mind on the super soul and the heart, that is called dhyana. When that meditation becomes uninterrupted, without the consideration of food, water, right, heat, cold, without any external consideration, if one can sit in that lotus posture, completely absorbed on the meditation of the Supreme Lord and the heart as Paramatma, when that meditation becomes uninterrupted by any external forces, that becomes samadhi. So these 8 stages, Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranayama, Pratyahara, Dharana, Dhyana, Samadhi. These are the 8 limbs of this Ashtanga Yoga, are the mechanical process to control the mind. By controlling the mind this way, finally he sees in the heart, right, the Supreme Lord in the Paramatma feature. When he sees that Lord in the Paramatma feature, definitely he gets, when the mind is controlled, mind is purified, he automatically awakens love for them, love for the Supreme Lord, and starts serving him. He graduates from the Ashtanga Yoga to Bhakti Yoga. Right? This yoga process helps one become free from all kinds of fear and anger, and thus feel the presence of the super soul in the transcendental situation. Right? How the mind gets pacified? By focusing the mind on the super soul in the heart, one can become free from fear and anger, because he knows that super soul is there always to guide us. He takes shelter of the super soul. In other words, Krishna consciousness is the easiest process of executing yoga principles. Whatever a yogi, Ashtanga yogi is doing through this difficult Ashtanga yoga process, the same thing can be done through Bhakti yoga in a very simple way by engaging the senses in the service of the Lord. This will be thoroughly explained in the next chapter. A Krishna conscious person, however, being always engaged in devotional service, does not risk losing his senses to some other engagement. This is a better way of controlling the senses than by Ashtanga yoga. So now, after giving, right, the process to control the mind, by controlling the mind, how one can attain liberation, right? Now, Krishna gives how one can attain peace. It's a very, very important verse. This verse can be memorized. If somebody, highly recommended to memorize this verse. This is the last verse of this chapter. We will finish this verse and then we will conclude, okay? Katyaniji, it's okay, right? You have time till 6:30, right? We can finish this verse, right? Okay. Oh, she already left, I think. No problem. So we will continue this verse. So I didn't realize, I am in the West Coast time, Pacific time. I didn't realize 5 o'clock here, 5:30 in India. And then I didn't set my alarm, That's why I have to start late. So from next week onwards, I will try to keep my alarm on time so that I get reminded. Maybe we can stop here, I think, right? I think we'll continue the next verse, last verse. Because it's a very important verse. I want others also to be there. So I got little, my sleeping pattern, right, is kind of jet lag and other things. I woke up actually at 4 a.m. And then again, I was reading something and then and then dozed off. I didn't realize, it already become 5:30. So thank you, Gopi Prabhu, for reminding me. And then I'll set up an alarm for next week so that, so we start the class on time. So we will stop here. Then we'll continue next week.
Okay, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. I have a doubt. Hare
Yes,
Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare
yes,
Krishna,
Prabhu.
Prabhuji.
Yes.
Hare Krishna.
Prabhu, in the starting, says that controlling of senses, you said, right, Prabhu. You have to control all the sense. You quoted the example of Vishwamitra, right, Prabhu?
Yes.
In that, it's one sense, it pulled all the other sense distracted. So what happened when we utilize one sense in Krishna conscious, like example taking prasadam, something we are reading. So we are at least utilizing one sense in bhakti.
Yes.
Why does it have the power to pull other senses in the Krishna consciousness? So it have take time or whether?
Yes.
You understand my question, Prabhu?
Yeah, understood the question. So he said one sense can pull us in a wrong direction by getting attracted to sense gratification. But when we come to Krishna conscious, we may not use all the senses in the beginning in serving Krishna. We might use one sense. For example, honoring prasadam, right? By tasting prasadam, we are engaging the tongue in the control of the, right, in the sense in Krishna service, right? By just using one sense, why it doesn't have the power to pull all the senses towards Krishna? It does have the power to pull all towards Krishna, all the senses towards Krishna. It takes time, it takes time. And see, most of the time, right, the thing is that when we do something, right, we get attracted. For example, I came to Krishna conscious by tasting prasadam. I liked prasadam very much. Then I started going to the temple. By started going to the temple, then I started getting association and I started reading Gita. Slowly, the knowledge started coming and everything. So end of the day, we need to have our identity understood properly. Prabhupada talks about identity, right? Our spiritual identity, when it's recognized, then everything becomes easier. So by engaging in one sense, right, is not sufficient in itself, because our sense, when we are attracted towards a material thing, right, that one sense, right, drags us in that particular direction. Even though we may not use all the senses in the direction, all the senses gets dragged that direction. Similarly, here when we come to Krishna consciousness, when one sense is engaged in Krishna service, all the senses are coming along with it, but all the senses are still not purified. Even other senses also has the potential to again drag us in different direction. So that is why we have to actively cultivate the process of Bhakti Yoga by engaging all the senses. Because all the senses need to be purified. One sense will drag us in one direction.
Actually,
Yes, go ahead.
Actually, how I get that out means that Angas of devotional service, 9 limbs, so we can practice at least one limb, so we can limit the Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam. So any one of the limbs we can practice, then we'll get that liberation. So that any one of the limbs is linked to particular sense, like the Shravanam or Kirtanam
Correct.
Linked to particular sense only. So that seems to sound actually so that
yeah, it's a very good question. See, in Bhagavatam, Prahlad Maharaj talks about 9 limbs of devotional service, starting with Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, Archanam, Vandanam, Dasyam, Sakyam, Atma Nivedanam, right? He talks about the 9 limbs of devotional service. Even one limb, one perfects, one can attain liberation. So with that one limb, we might use one particular sense. For example, Shravanam, hearing, we might use ears. But if that engagement of that particular sense is so strong, all the senses will be, even though all the senses may not be used in that particular anga, but if all the senses are following that particular one sense, yes, it is possible. For that particular absorption, engagement of that particular sense has to be very strong. Right?
Yes,
so it has the ability to pull all of them in the same direction. One sense, if the particular pull of a sense in a particular direction is strong enough, all the senses can be also pulled towards that. It has the ability. But if our strong towards that pulling is not very strong, right? If the other senses are pulling in the other direction, then we'll get distracted. If, for example, hearing, if our attention to hearing is not strong, then other senses will be pulling us in different direction. But if we develop such a strong attachment for hearing, it is sufficient, because automatically this sense of hearing through ears automatically can pull the other senses also in this direction. If that attachment to hearing is not strong, then the senses will pull us in different direction. It has the potential, but the development of the taste has to be there. The attachment to hearing has to be strong enough. If that is attachment to hearing is not strong, automatically other senses will pull us. That is why when we say, even by perfecting one limb of devotional service is sufficient. But for us in general, that is not possible because we don't have that ability to do one particular thing strong. So also hence our senses, we want to engage in all the other activities of Krishna. We are not just doing only Shravanam itself is sufficient to liberate us. But we are not just only doing Shravanam. We are also doing Shravanam, Kirtanam, right? Vishnu Smaranam, Pada Sevanam, Archanam, Vandanam, Dasyam, Sakyam, Atma Nivedanam. One is itself sufficient. But in our practice of devotional service, we do Shravanam and Kirtanam. These are the two important things, hearing and chanting. Because this will get us, by hearing and chanting, will help us to really identify who we are. Our spiritual identity can be awakened. Once the spiritual identity is awakened, then it's easier to do all the other things. That is why Bhakti Yoga is much easier compared to other process. Yes, Prabhuji.
So, even though faith is not so strong, so we have to have those people who have very good faith. So that's why we have that satsanga is very important. Right?
Now the question is, like for example, in terms of developing taste for hearing, how do you develop taste for hearing? By associating people with who have taste for hearing.
Hearing, yes.
Then we will also develop the taste. By associating people who have taste for hearing, we will also develop a taste for hearing. Associating means, associating means like exchanging, right? The loving reciprocation with those people who have, by serving them, right? By hearing from them, by, having prasadam with them, giving prasadam, taking prasadam, giving gifts, receiving gifts, revealing one's mind in confidence, and then hearing from them about confidential knowledge about Krishna, right? The 6 loving exchanges, Rupa Goswami explains in Upadeshamrita. Of course, we will see those things later in detail. The 6 loving exchange, when we associate with devotees who have particular taste for a particular aspect of devotional service, by associating with them, we will also develop that taste. So for a practicing sadhaka, the hearing and chanting, Shravanam and Kirtanam, is the 2 important process of the 9 limbs. Because by doing that, automatically other things will manifest as well. Okay?
Thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, we will stop here and then we will continue next week. I'm really sorry. I messed up the timing. And the next week, we will start on time at 5:30 p.m. India time. That is 5 a.m. Pacific time.
Theater time.
Yeah. So I'm in Seattle. So I'm in Pacific time now. I kind of got messed up my timing and I didn't keep the alarm. So thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna.